Hey everyone, it's Terry with the Des Moines, Iowa user group. And in today's session, I had the privilege actually of presenting some of my own material this time around, and it was simply called Fundamentally Flow. It's the first time that I have started to put together this new series, so this was kind of a debut. And what we talked about is just, I think we hit 4 items. We talked about what a variable is. We talked about how to get records into your Salesforce org or into your flow. We talked about loops, which is, I know, a difficult topic for several to understand. And we talked about naming conventions, a best practice for naming conventions. If you find yourself struggling with flow and some of the basic concepts around flow, you're not alone. A lot of people are struggling with that. This series is going to help you understand some of those fundamentals and how to apply them, when you need to use them, how to use them, and it's going to, I think, really break down some of the barriers that are keeping a lot of us from really being crazy about flow. Take a listen to this first presentation that I did today with our user group.
I think next on the agenda, Terry, you are up with your flow presentation, so I'll let you take it away.
All right, very good. So thank you, and thanks for actually signing up for coming today, because I always feel a little bit odd presenting to my own group. I do presentations for a lot of other Salesforce user groups, and it feels a little bit more natural to be there, but thank you for letting me do that and actually for coming. So I talk a lot to Salesforce admins, and we talk back and forth all the time, mostly with a lot of you all. And one of the things that they tell me, or you guys will tell me frequently, is flow is intimidating. It's hard to understand. They use these terms that I'm just not familiar with. The concepts are confusing. I just don't get it, Terry. If go to your chat window real quick, if you would, and if you can relate to those types of statements, just say, yeah, that's me, or something. Just let me know how many of you can relate to the concept that flow is just a little bit difficult to understand. And I know, and I saw Justin joined, and Justin is like our area expert on flow. So at the end, and in fact, if you have questions about flow as we go through this, PM him and just ask him, because you've got like the expert in the area right here on flow. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. If this is you're in the right place, because what this next series that I'm working on is all about is I'm calling it fundamentally flow, and it's taking some of the key concepts of flow that are often kind of confusing to us, and we're going to break it down in a way that hopefully you can relate to, or maybe you'll be able to understand it better as we go through these various ideas. This presentation, I'm going to only hit on a few of these items, but we're going to talk about in the blog post and the YouTube videos that you'll be seeing on my channel about a large variety of different concepts that might just be stumbling blocks for you. Let me start with an example. In the chat window, if you could, please tell me, how many of you have a dresser, say like in your bedroom? Do you have a dresser in your bedroom? Yeah. And that's cool. If you do have a dresser in your bedroom, does your dresser have drawers in it? Do you have drawers in your I'm not really sure if it would be a dresser if it didn't have drawers. So I'm hoping that you have drawers in your dresser. One more question for you. Do you put stuff in your drawers in your dresser? Yeah, of course we do. Of course we do. So let me maybe make this suggestion. If you have the ability to understand the concept of a dresser and drawers and putting stuff in a drawer, then the idea of variables is something that will be really easy for you to understand. You see, drawers are variables. It's true, it's true. So perhaps you're thinking, Terry's lost his mind. He used to be such a really good guy, and I think he's maybe going crazy. He thinks drawers are variables. It's true. I do think drawers are variables. And here, let me show you this. I have a pair of socks here. These are my trailhead socks. These are really lovely trailhead socks that I've never worn. But if I want to put these somewhere, I'm going to put them in my dresser drawer. I'm going to store them there. And then anytime I need to get these socks, I just go to that drawer and I can open it and there's my socks. Drawers are variables. Maybe it's not clicking yet with you. So think about it this way. Drawers are variables, are like drawers, store things that we put in them. Let me say that one more time. Variables are like drawers. We store things in them. I put my socks in my socks drawer. That's where they belong. Socks go in the socks drawer. Anytime I need socks, I go to the socks drawer and there it is. There's my socks. I will tell you, and some of you who know me, probably this won't be a shock to you, but I like things pretty well organized. So I also have a shirts drawer in my dresser, and only shirts go in my shirts drawer. Socks are not allowed in the shirts drawer. They don't belong there. It's only for shirts. Now, if I go one layer deeper here, I also have a drawer for pants. Pants go in the pants drawer. Shirts don't go in the pants drawer. Pants go in the pants drawer. That's what that drawer is for. It stores pants for me. So drawers are variables. Variables are drawers because they work in kind of the same way. If I have a socks drawer, that's what I put in it. If I have a shirts drawer, I put it in shirts in that shirts drawer. If I have a variable that I need to set up, I need to tell it what type of thing is going to be stored in that variable. We call those data types. Now, you as admins, you have been very familiar with this concept, maybe slightly different way. When you go to create a custom field in Salesforce, what is the first thing that Salesforce asks you to do when you create a custom field? Any takers on that?
Name.
The data type. Yeah, they ask you, what do you want to use that field for? So this concept of variables, which we use a lot inside of Flow, is really no different. When we define a variable, the very first thing we have to do, other than give it a name, is tell it what type of information are we going to store in that variable. So there you go. Next time you're thinking about variables and they're confusing to you, just remember that Terry says that a variable is like a drawer, and it is like a drawer. Now, you could go a little bit further with this if you wanted. Let's say I am working with an account record. My account record could be a dresser, and inside that account record has multiple drawers, and maybe I have a drawer for a first name, a drawer for a last name. I might have a drawer that's designed as an email address. Those are also forms of variables. Does that make sense? Understand kind of the concept there of what a variable is. I'm going to share my screen if I can find my mouse and the mess that I have on all over my room. And we're going to kind of take a look at some examples of what this might look like. All right, hopefully you see my Salesforce screen. I've got the right one up.
Yep.
All right, good. And I'm just making your faces bigger so I can see you all. And I love it. Thank you for those of you who are on camera. It is so much nicer to see faces than a little black box. So I appreciate that. I'm going to go through some demos here of just some concepts that might help us as we think about flow. And to do that, I've got a use case that we're going to primarily look at. And it starts by looking at our account screen. And I'm on a simple list view. This demo org only has 20 accounts records in it. And you'll see that the second column here represents a CSAT rating for each of the customers. You'll notice that at the very bottom, I've got a couple here who do not have a CSAT rating. My flow example that we're going to look at today is not necessarily practical for your org, but it does work really well for demos. And so what it does is it simply is going to get all of my account records. It's going to spin through those records and give us a count of how many satisfied accounts do we have, how many are neutral, how many are unsatisfied, how many are not answered, have not responded. So that, let me just kind of run it and you can kind of see it in action. Fundamentally flow, welcome to fundamentally flow. That might be a little bit small for you to see. Just a simple text message there on the front. We'll click next. And sure enough, it gives me my results. Current CSAT results are that we have 10 records that are satisfied. We have 5 neutral, 3 unsatisfied, 2 that are not assigned. And because I've got 2 that are not assigned, I'm asking, do you want to assign those? And you get the answer to that question down here at the bottom. And we're going to go ahead and assume, of course, we want to answer those questions. So the first record that wasn't answered comes up, and I've got the option here now to select what is the status or their CSAT rating. And I'm simply going to say this one's neutral. They're not really a big promoter of us. You know, we're familiar with them and they like us, but you know, they're not out there advocating on our behalf. I'll click next and it takes me now to the next record. This one is University of Arizona and they love us. You know, they have recommended people to us all the time. I'm pretty sure that they are extremely satisfied with our service. So we're going to go ahead and leave that as satisfied and click next. And we get a nice little message here that says, thank you for playing along. And that basically then concludes our flow. If I come back to our related list and click refresh, if everything worked right, and it did, we now have a CSAT rating for all of our users. So that's our use case. That's the scenario that we're going to be working through as we go through some of this exercise today. The Fundamentally Flow series that I'm working on is going to cover a variety of different topics. One of them is that variable topic that we just went through. And I cover that in a little bit greater detail on a blog post that hopefully I have out by this time next week. And that will kind of further explain how you go about creating variables and so forth. And also do a little bit better job maybe of explaining how similar variables really are to your dressers. We're going to start off here with one that will be around working with data. And the first one we're going to talk about is simply this little get records option. And if I click into the get records, it's going to give me the ability to query information and then just be able to use that. I'm not going to actually leverage that one. I'm going to click a new resource. I'm sorry, not new resource. Getting myself a little ahead of myself. I'm going to add an element. We're going to create a brand new get records. And I want to do it this way just so that you kind of get the idea. This is what it's going to look like if you were to create a new record. And I'm going to simply call it get my accounts. And the first thing then that we are asked to do when we are getting information is, what's the object that you want to get it from? What's the source of your data? And that's going to be, in our case, the account object. That brings us down here to this next section. And one of the things that I hear from admins is, well, this is kind of like I'm writing a query and I'm not a developer. I don't know how to write queries, Terry. Well, let me challenge you to think of this not necessarily as a query, but as a report. Because all of you, I bet all of you, know how to create filters in your reports. And I bet you've probably created a filter on a list view as well. That's all this is. I really like the fact that Salesforce does call this a filter, because that kind of does lead us a little bit closer to something that we're more comfortable with. And all we are needing to do here is indicate what is that filter going to be for this particular set of data. And you can simply grab whatever that needs to be and filter out the results of that get statement. Based on that filter, that's going to bring back a set of records for us. You can control the sort order next on the screen if you choose to, but we're going to look at these last two items on the get record. And the first one here simply says, how many records do you want to bring back? We've got two options. We can bring back the first record only, or we can bring back all records. Now that's an important concept there to understand, because if I bring back just a single record, it's just a single record. If I bring back multiple records, it's what we call a collection of records. It simply means that we are bringing back more than one. I have these cards, this stack of cards that I have here. I actually put these together early in the pandemic. It says kind of fun little stuff on these cards. Maybe I'm going too fast. You can't hear me. Different fun little things like that. Background noise, that'd be bad. Please hold just for a second. If this was my accounts, if these cards represented my accounts, if I get multiple records, then I've got this whole deck of cards that are going to be stored in this collection variable. Okay, it's a collection variable. That's what you're going to get with all records. If I go with the first one, I get one card. The bottom one, I get all of them that meet that filter criteria. So that is an important concept to understand. And it's, as you go through your flow, it's important to understand the difference between a collection and something that's just a single value, because you can do different things with collections that you can't do with a single record value, or and vice versa. It'll make more sense here as we go. How do I want to store this data? This one is kind of an interesting one. And when Flow first came out, we didn't have this option, and we always had to use this third one, and it really did confuse people a lot. Salesforce has made this so much easier for us now. We've got this automatically store all fields. That's awesome. Most of the time, it's awesome. It's really, really easy. You can select that. Everything that is a part of your account query is all of your fields. Everything's going to be set up for you. It's super, super easy. So, Terry, why wouldn't I just do that all the time? Why do I need these other options? Well, let's look at some of these other options. The second one here is choose the fields and let Salesforce do the rest. Let's say I have my account object and it's got, I don't know, 200 fields on that object. I don't necessarily need all 200 fields in my flow. And if I bring all 200 fields in, I can certainly do the easy path and let Salesforce manage it. But it's bringing in really a lot of noise and overhead that I don't need inside of my flow. So I might want to narrow down the fields that I'm querying and just bring back the ones that I need. That would be option number 2. The third option I mentioned before used to be our only option. And what we would have to do here is actually define the entire thing. We would have to give it a collection variable name. We'd have to define it. And then once we defined it, we then would have to tell it what fields do we also want to bring in. It took a lot of effort back then to create these things. It's a lot easier today. And there's times when I still like this. It's if you're one of those control freaks and you really want to kind of be in charge of the entire thing with your flow, you're going to like option number 3 probably better than the other 2. So keep that in mind. That is real quick an explanation on getting records into your flow. Let's cancel out of that. There's our get statement. Ours simply for our use case got all of our account records. You don't want to do that in your org. You've got too many account records. I only had 20. It was safe. I didn't have to put a filter on it. But then we come to our intro screen. That's that little nice message that we had. But the next item I wanted to explain and talk to is this one called loops. Because loops is one that is another brand new concept to most of us as admins. We are not used to having to think about loops. Loops is something that we gave our developers to do. And most of the time they understood that process of what does a loop actually mean. I'm going to come back to my little cards that I have here. What's happening inside this loop is I'm telling it that I've got a collection meaning multiple records. I've got all of my records now in my collection, and I need to loop through each of these records. That collection variable is only going to let you put something there that is truly a collection. If I would have done just a single record, I could not use that variable in this loop. It has to be a variable that has more than one record associated to it. So that's my collection, and it's simply going to work its way through one record at a time until it gets to the very end, and then it's going to move out. This is really super easy to see with the way they lay it out on our form. So let me bring that up. For each item in the loop, we're going to come down here and we're going to hit a decision. So for every record that I bring up in my collection, I'm going to loop through that record and evaluate it. And it's either going to be something that is satisfied, neutral, unsatisfied, or it's not rated. Let's take a quick look at that decision. Simply is looking at this resource here called the loop account now. So our variable changed. If you remember when in our get statement, it was get accounts. It was all of our records, all of our account records. Now we're inside of that loop, and the loop is feeding to us a single record at a time. And that single record is what this is referring to. When I click into that resource, I've got the ability to find that loop right here. So that is referring to my individual record, one record at a time. And if it is set to satisfied, it's going to move down this satisfied path. And all that's happening inside of here is we are incrementing a variable that we called satisfied count. That variable data type is a number. Remember my socks? My socks go in the socks drawer. So drawers are variables. This is a variable that holds numbers. And all I'm doing is I'm adding 1 to that variable when I go down this particular path. It allows me to do that auto incrementing and get a total number at the very end of our flow. We do the same thing down each of these different channels. Unrated is slightly different. And unrated is different because we are capturing one additional piece of information and we're storing it off. So let's say that I've got this record that I'm looping through here, and this record happens to not be marked as with a CSTAT rating, I want to be able to keep track of that record. And so what I'm doing in the second half here, I have another variable. It is a collection that I can store this record in. So when I come to the very end of my flow, I've got now a new variable with its own set of records that I can loop through. So we'll see how that works as we go through this. So that is in essence what's happening inside of this loop. So the concept, again, just real quick, that loop is a collection of records. I am going to evaluate one record at a time. It's going to look at that decision for that record, see which criteria does it fit, and it's going to route it down the appropriate channel. When it's done, it simply circles all the way back up here to my loop. And now I'm looking at record number 2. Record number 3 is next. So one record at a time, that's what's happening inside of that loop. Does that make sense to people? You get that concept? Now, now that I have worked all the way through each of those records one at a time, what a loop will then do is send you down this path that they refer to as after last. After I've looped through every one of the records, I simply come down the after path, and that takes me to the next section of my flow. And you'll see here, I've got another loop. This loop is actually working through the additional variable, that collection that I set up on my unsatisfied side. So every card that went into this unsatisfied is now sitting inside of this particular loop, where I bring up a screen that allows us to choose its value. And once we are finished, we simply update the record. We tell everybody thank you, and we're done. That was a pretty quick way of kind of going through those. I'm going to, with each of the blog posts that I put together, explain those in even greater detail, and there'll be videos that walk us through those as well. But fundamentally, flow is in essence trying to help us understand or make sense of some of these concepts that for us as admins, we may not be quite as familiar with. So that is the direction that we're headed. Now, one of the other items that I wanted to show is a best practice with flows. And it's kind of one that honestly, I kind of learned it the hard way. It's really easy to give your elements on your flow and your variables just any name that you kind of want to give it. I would challenge you to use a naming convention. I don't even care what your naming convention is, just have one. Here's why. When you get into flows that are more complicated, you have your list of resources that are, and a resource is just things that you have placed or created or placed inside of your flow. And that list can get quite long. And let's say that you might have over 500 resources in some flows. They get complicated enough that very well could happen. And let's say I wanted to find, where am I using unrated? I can simply put that in, and this is going to now filter my list. You can see there now everything on this screen is my variables that have to do with unrated. Maybe I want to see, well, what are the variables that I've defined? Well, I start all of my variable names with the word with var. And so that lets me quickly say, okay, these are my variables. Maybe I want to see, I'm in a really large org and or a flow, and I want to see where are all my loops. I can simply type in loop, and it shows me now, these are the loops that I have in the system. And by clicking on those, it takes me right into where I can work with it if I choose to. But naming conventions, if you are not using them currently in Flow, I would really highly recommend you start using them. If you want to know the naming convention that I use, I do have a blog post out there on terrystidbits.com that does show you what I use for my naming convention. There's no magic in doing it the way that I do it. I just think it's important for you to have one, because as your flows get more complicated, as you're building more and more into them, it is so much easier to debug when you've got a good naming convention. If something breaks, it's a lot easier to try to find it. So I appreciate the opportunity, and this is going to be fairly short. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some of this with you today. If this is a concept or things that you would like to be able to kind of track with me on and learn from, do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on my blog post. It's terrystidbits.com. You can search for that; it'll come up. And we're going to break out all of these items, such as getting, how do we work with data? So that could be getting data, getting records. It could be updating records, creating brand new records. We'll even talk about the deleting record aspect. If, when would I use an assignment versus, say, an update? What's the difference, and what's an assignment anyway? We'll work through those kinds of concepts. We'll go into that looping concept as well. We'll look at all of the various screen elements. So if you've struggled with creating screens and understanding, well, how do I use an email element when I've dragged that out onto my screen? We'll talk through that and help you understand those concepts. All of these different input options, they're a little bit different in how they work. So sometimes having somebody help you guide you through those is certainly helpful for you. So debugging flows is another one that I want to walk people through. I know that that's an area that will sometimes be confusing as well. So we're going to break down that concept as we go through this as well. So with that, that was super fast introduction. But any questions that you have on flow, Justin would love to answer your flow questions. I'm certain of it. How many of you, if you can, tell me in the chat window, or unmute yourself if you would. How many of you are actively writing flows?
Non-looping flows, Terry.
Non-looping loops are confusing. Yes, they are. They can be. Yeah, good. Yeah. Awesome. And what I'm finding is that a lot of people are starting to just kind of dive in or dip their toes in. If you're just brand new to flows and it's been one that's a little bit confusing, my recommendation for your first entry into flow is not to do a screen flow like what we did here. My recommendation is that you start with record trigger flows. If you've followed me at all, you've seen an entire series where I talk about moving from process builder to lightning record trigger flows. That is your easiest way to learn flow. And it's your easiest way to kind of master some of these concepts is using record trigger flows. It matches up almost identically to the way that you use process builder,
Terry,
with a lot more features and functions. So keep that in mind. That's out there on a whole set of stuff on that on my channel. So check that out. Yeah, Karen.
yeah, Terry or Justin, I have a philosophical question about record triggered flows because I was working with a teammate this week, and regarding record triggered flows, you know how it used to be that with a process builder, the rule was one process builder to rule them all, like per object, one process builder per object.
Yep.
And I did see some Reddit boards that had like definite debates regarding whether you can apply the same rule to a record triggered flow. What are your thoughts? I saw somebody from Salesforce who said she did not recommend it. Have either of you thought through this, or do you have thoughts?
I'll share mine, but I am curious, Justin, what your thoughts are too. So I'll let you share. My thought is that I generally will create at least two. I'll create a before record trigger flow and then an after record trigger flow, and I put all of the items inside of one of those two flows. I rarely, if ever, will in my record trigger flows have any kind of condition on that start element. There are exceptions, but in general, I don't filter records based off of that start element. I will use a single before record trigger flow and a single after. There are use cases where you could do it very similar to the way we would write code, which would be, say, triggers. We would have a before record trigger flow, a after record trigger flow, we could do one specific for inserts. We could do one specific for updates. I have found that most cases, the two work well for me. Justin, what's your take on it?
I did see someone named Diana Jaffe from Salesforce who recommended using more of a scenario-based approach, but you are leaning more toward a single object. So yeah,
I do
Justin, on
because
here.
yeah, I do because I don't want to search through 100 different flows to find what I'm looking for. I don't want to search through a lot of process builders to figure out which one's the one that has the issue in it that I'm looking for. I want it all in one place. That's my take. Justin, I'll shut up, let you talk.
Too late. No, I'm just kidding. There's one major aspect that you cannot get around by having multiple flows is that you still cannot control the order they fire, which may not matter. But if it does, and you split them out, then you've already painted yourself into a bit of a corner. So keeping them together in that one respect is probably the only hard rule why you would need to have them in one flow. Past that, I have been idly pondering what would be best. To this point, I have been doing separate flows, but I think in either case, it comes down to your own personal management skills. That if you're going to create one flow, how big is it? Because are you going to manage one massive flow, which can slow it down? Same thing goes for Process Builder back in the day. Process builders, if you're really getting into it, you can get so big that it could take a minute, sometimes 2 literal minutes to save the process builder. Flows can also suffer from bloat. If you're doing a lot, it might make sense to break it apart. Though in those cases, there might be more subflows and something else, but I'd say it's less hard, fast rule of you must have one. Even Process Builder had certain scenarios you had to break it apart, particularly with scheduled actions. There were certain scenarios you would have to split them into separate process builders because you couldn't continue on to your next step without after a certain timed trigger. I still leave it up to the artist's skills and behavior.
Very good, very good.
I,
Yeah,
uh,
I liked your thought there too, because about the subflows, because record trigger flows to date don't support subflows, which can be a pain in the butt.
I'm thinking about normal screen flows, but still.
Yeah, I can't wait till they get that one fixed, because then I can just have all of my decision pieces within my record trigger flow and then send it somewhere else for the actions if the actions are intensive. Carla, your
yeah,
thought?
I was just thinking the same thing, because I think I would definitely model my flows. If I'm going to move away from code triggers, I'm going to model my flows like I would a trigger framework. So logicless triggers moving to trigger handlers. So I would have a flow that would send it to subflows to be able to do the actual processing. So that's how I would look at it. But I just came across yesterday actually what was it called? A trigger framework. It's actually for triggers, but it does support flows where you can actually invoke flows and determine the order that they fire using custom metadata types. It's pretty in depth, but it's pretty awesome as well.
Do you have that post, Carla, to share?
Yeah, I have the link right here.
Thank you.
I will share that. It is in GitHub, so if it's a little advanced, but just read this really good documentation in here. You can read through it.
And then the link that was just posted there as well in our chat window, that's a Facebook group that has been started here recently that there is a lot of really good insight that's flowing around in that Facebook group as well. So that's a good resource. Other questions that you have on flow?
I do have a question about screen flows. So
Yeah.
how, kind of related to that one per object question, how are screen flows fit into that? Like that Facebook group, one person, and the advice varies, but one person did say screen flows don't quite matter as much. You could have one flow per screen flow, but how do those work, I guess? Where do they fit into the mix?
Well, I think of screen flows, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get your question answered quite in the right context, but let me try to frame it this way. I see screen flows as being specific to a task or to a process. Now I may have a large process that will call subflow screen flows, but to the extent, and kind of maybe piggybacking a little bit off of Carla, what you were brought up with, how would a developer write something? We would break code into chunks that can be reused. So if you've got, when you think about your processes, if there's a process that you have that you need to be able to call it from multiple different areas and reuse it, separate that out into its own flow, and then reference it from any other number of flows that you might have in your system.
Thank you.
Did I get to the right
No,
meat of your question?
I think you did. I think I'm just
Okay.
still learning. So
right.
yeah, we have like on one object, we want to be able to have screen flows to walk people through creating different like record types, because they all have
Sure.
different,
Yes.
different filters and different values that we want to display, different fields. So on this one record, there might be 15 different things they can create. So
Yeah.
it's 15 screen flows, but then how do we
I wouldn't want 15 buttons or something on my Lightning record page either. So I'd probably have a single one that then navigates to the others. That'd be.
Yeah, it'll be in like a community, so they'll land on a place with the list or whatever.
Got it.
But yeah, it'd be like they click one and it takes them through this process. They click a different
using
one.
Justin's term, it's kind of the art of the design in some situations like that. It's an art form.
Yeah, and every situation is so different. I mean, every use case is so different. Every org is so different. So being general in some of these answers is kind of hard to do.
Well, thank you. That helps though.
But knowing the fundamentals is essential, so you can make the right decisions.
Yeah. Anybody else have questions on that you want to? You've got some good experts on the call, so take advantage of them. I always love it when smarter people than me are on the calls, because that's great. Are you all going to, next time you go into your bedroom, look at your dresser and think, wow, that's a variable? I shared that even with my family, who absolutely don't understand what I do other than they say I play in sandboxes all day long. They understood that scenario. All right, well, very good. I appreciate it. Justin, you are up, I think, next with our release readiness. So thanks for joining us and participating.